to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss on basic elements of scientific method, and here we are going to discuss in detail the origin of hypothesis. In the first part of the lecture, we try to understand what is hypothesis, what is a good hypothesis, how to construct a good hypothesis, and the three types of hypothesis. Now, this discussion is limited to the reading by Goode and Hatt in basic elements of scientific method. This part of the lecture, we are going to discuss the different origin of hypothesis, the sources from which hypothesis develops. So, the general culture in which a science develops furnishes many of its basic hypotheses, steering the focus of research. The dominant values of a society challenge scientific attention towards certain phenomena and relationship. For example, the American culture. What is the American culture's core value? That is, the variant of Western culture is assumed to emphasize individual happiness, mobility and competition. In contrast to the Western American culture, if we were to understand the core value of Zuni culture, this contrast which emphasize group, avoidance of personal competition and less concern with individuals' happiness. So, what is the resulting hypothesis? The American emphasis on personal happiness has been a highly productive source of hypothesis across social science. Textbook economics often rest on the premise of personal happiness as the central motivation. Countless sociological and psychological studies focus on marital happiness and adjustment, which is often synonymous with happiness. Beyond major cultural value, folk wisdom, common sense proposition serves as another significant source of hypothesis that must be subjected to scientific testing. So, first source of is scientific knowledge itself. Now, this scientific knowledge will also emerge from the culture. Now, the cultures are different. The comparison is between the Western culture and say the non-Western culture. Another source of origin of hypothesis is the folk culture, the folk knowledge. Example of folk wisdom as source of hypothesis is the concept of race. In Western society, particularly in the United States and South Africa, race is thought to be an important determinant of human behavior. The sociologist cannot accept such a folk belief as fact simply because it is widely held. Instead, the belief itself becomes a source of hypothesis that must be scientifically tested to determine their validity or lack thereof. Hypotheses arise internally within a scientific discipline through established process of building knowledge and the specific culture of scientific practice. This the formal process where what is already known, and what is already known is the theory and fact, is used as a foundation, and the logical deduction leads to the formulation of new testable proposition. So, here the hypothesis is originating from science. So, from where are we building the research question or the tentative proposition? It is being built from the facts and theory, which is a body of knowledge. Now, theories state what is known and gives direction to research. New problems are identified by deducing relationship that must be true if the established theory holds. For example, communication research, the existence of opinion leader was verified. Opinion leaders were found to be prestigeful people, that is high status. Knowing that status is a function of many variables, researchers logically hypothesized the existence of a single complex, that is the influential person, and that becomes an ideal type. In a study, the observed influential persons did not share many characteristics, acting as a deviant case of anomaly that challenged the simple ideal type. This finding led to further questioning and the formulation of a new, more refined hypothesis, that is, the existing of two distinct categories of influentials, which Merton termed the cosmopolitan and the local influential, each with its own specific characteristics. So, the development shows how the failure of an initial hypothesis, that is the type influential as an ideal type, had certain problems, failures, and therefore, this hypothesis led to refine the concept and generate new, more sophisticated hypothesis, that is the classification of influentials into cosmopolitan and the local by Merton. The another method of acquiring the folklore of the discipline is in terms of less formal cultural aspect of science, where the scientist must acquire the folk ways of their discipline. Science is a social relation. The shared traditions, values, and accepted method of a scientific community, that is the folk ways, shape how problems are perceived and where questions are deemed important and worthy of study. This ensures the research is relevant to the field's ongoing conversation. The development of hypothesis is strongly influenced by socialization process within a scientific discipline. Students learn from the teacher to identify promising research areas, adequate method, and which scholar or theories are superior or inferior. This early learning effectively limits the range of hypotheses the student is likely to develop. Later in their career, scientists are guided by the approval and consensus of their colleagues. Through constant formal and informal interaction, discussions, publications, fashionable modes of thought, terminology, and problems develop. This peer-driven consensus suggests further hypotheses that are currently deemed important within the field. Analogy is another source of hypothesis. Analogy applies concepts of theory from one domain to another, is a fertile source of hypothesis, often bridging different scientific disciplines. While suggestive analogy must be used cautiously because the models being borrowed are clearly understood within the original theoretical framework, but may not relate well to the new frame of reference. It is dangerous to assume that natural areas in human society are product of symbiosis, a concept from biology, unless there is an empirical method to apply and measure the concept in human beings. It is equally dangerous to assume that demographic potential in social physics is the same exact phenomena as gravitational potential in physics. The individual life history and personal experience of the scientist play a crucial role in determining the type and form of questions, that is the hypothesis they ask. Here it implies that personal experience are also playing important role in hypothesis formulation. So, the idiosyncratic perception is just as personal experience structure perceptions enabling optical illusion, some individuals are able to perceive an interesting pattern or theoretical relationship from a jumble of facts that others overlook. So, it is your way in which you are perceiving the knowledge, and from that knowledge you are able to abstract certain important concepts and the hypothesis is formulated. So, the right man at the right time. The history of science is filled with instances where discovery was made because the right individual, due to their unique training or life history, made the right observation. And here the example is the Darwin Malthus. The development of the theory of natural selection by Charles Darwin illustrates the importance of personal experience in hypothesis formulation. Darwin had amassed an enormous body of fact on species variation, many of which had been known for generations. This data lacked a systematic ordering or theoretical explanation for why species change. Darwin happened to read Thomas Malthus' work on population, which stated that population growth unchecked would overwhelm resources, the struggle for existence. Darwin combined his observation on individual variation with Malthus' ideas of a resource limited environment. He concluded that individuals with variation that gave them an advantage would survive and reproduce, the core of natural selection. Thomas Henry Huxley alleged exclamation, "Oh, what an ass I was not to have thought of that," highlights that the necessary facts were widely available, but Darwin's unique path led him to the specific synthesis. So, how do we kind of judge the usability of hypothesis? The criteria for judging the usability of hypothesis by highlighting the first and most fundamental requirement is conceptual clarity. The necessity of conceptual clarity arises because the human mind generates numerous potential hypotheses, most of which are unusable. Conceptual clarity is a two-part requirement. The first, clear definition. The concept used within the hypothesis must be clearly defined. Ideally, these definitions should be operational, meaning they state how the concept will be measured or observed. For example, how social class is measured using income and occupational indices. The second criteria of conceptual clarity is communicability and acceptance. The definition of concepts must be commonly accepted and communicable within the scientific community, avoiding concepts that exist only in a private world, that is, definition unique to the researcher. Now, we need to follow three-step technique for ensuring the conceptual clarity of a hypothesis. Number one, list concepts. Write out a list of all the concepts used in the research outline. Number two, define verbally. Define them in words, that is the theoretical definition. Number three, define operationally and contextually. Define them in terms of number one, particular operation, that is index calculations, types of observations, and the second is reference to other concepts to be found in previous accepted research. So, you need to completely be clear how the concept used in this particular research is different from the other research. The second crucial criteria for usable hypothesis is empirical referent and explains why hypothesis cannot embody moral judgment or value statements. This means that the concept within the hypothesis must ultimately refer to observable phenomena in the real world that can be measured or tested. The problem with moral judgment, no usable hypothesis can embody moral judgments as these express a value statement or moral preachment rather than a testable relationship between fact. Example of unusable statement, capitalists exploit their workers. The term exploit is a moral condemnation, not an empirical observation. Second example, women should pursue a career. Should is value term expressing an obligations or preference. Third example of unusable statements, pigs are well named because they are so dirty. This is a subjective moral aesthetic judgment. While a scientist may study value judgment, investigating why people believe capitalists exploit workers, the goal must be separated from merely advocating for expressing the value itself. The what to do section provides a method for transforming unusable value-laden statement into empirically testable hypotheses. Look for keywords that express attitude rather than describing phenomena such as out, should, or bad. So, what are the practical transformations of concept? Transform the vague, value laden notion into useful concepts by defining the empirical observation that the value term implies. If the referent for the concept remains only a vague feeling and the researcher cannot define the operations needed to observe it, the problem must be studied. The third characteristic of a usable hypothesis is specificity, precision in prediction and operation. A useful hypothesis must be specific, meaning all the operation and prediction it indicates must be clearly spelled out. This is critical for assessing the testability and validity of the hypothesis before expending research effort. Specificity requires more than just conceptual clarity. It demands a clear description of all necessary indexes and measurement. All concepts must be defined in operational terms, detailing procedures used for observation and measurement. The hypothesis must include a statement of the indexes to be used. For example, if hypothesizing that vertical social mobility is decreasing, the researcher must specify which index: political office, occupation, effective income, education, and defining this will define status label and mobility. However, when we kind of have general concepts, there are certain dangers of it. So, hypotheses that are too general or grandiose are often not testable. Tempting though they may be due to the impressive scope. A specific hypothesis avoids the trap of using selective evidence, a tactic used by prophets and fortune tellers whose vague predictions can be interpreted as fulfilled by almost any occurrence. The more specific the predictions, the smaller the chance that it will be borne out by the mere accident. Scientific prediction must be definite to ensure that test results are meaningful. Researchers should never be satisfied with a general prediction if it can be broken down into more precise sub-hypotheses. Forming specific sub-hypotheses has two main advantages. Number one, it clarifies the relationship between the data being sought and eventual conclusion. And number two, it makes the specific research task more manageable. The fourth characteristic of a usable hypothesis is the relationship to available technique, emphasizing the necessary connection between theory and method. A usable hypothesis should be formulated with an awareness of the techniques available to test it. A theorist who is unaware of contemporary technique is ill-equipped to ask unstable questions. The general rule: researchability. The relationship to available technique is a sensible requirement applied to any problems in its early stage to judge its researchability. A hypothesis should be formulated in a way that its concept can be measured and its relationship tested using current or forcible method. Practical steps for the researcher to ensure that they are able to formulate the hypothesis in the correct manner. To ensure a hypothesis is related to an available technique, a researcher should follow the following step. Number one, review the literature. Look for research articles on the subject and list the various techniques used to measure the important factors. Number two, assess techniques' availability. If no techniques are discussed, the researcher faces a choice. The choice is between focus on methodology or reduce scope. So, when we focus on methodology, research specifically on the necessary research techniques, and when there is a choice of reducing the scope, conclude that the problem is too large and general for present resources and narrow the focus of the research. The third step for the researcher to ensure identifying the technique for data collection is analyze methodological choices. For areas studied by many techniques like stratification or race attitude, try to determine why one technique is chosen over another and how technical refinements might be applied to the current research. The fourth practical step for researcher is to borrow and adapt. For problems with few attempts at precise measurement, example, religious behavior, study the literature to understand the region and ascertain whether techniques used in other study, for example, attitude measurement, stratification measure can be successful adapted, or there is a need to have new techniques. The final and the most important characteristics of a usable hypothesis is relation to a body of theory. A hypothesis must be logically derived from and based upon an existing body of fact and theory. This is essential because a science can only be cumulative if each new study helps to refute, qualify, or support existing theoretical frameworks rather than operating as an isolated survey. Theoretical development example, the social character of intelligence, the text illustrate this criterion with the historical development of theories on intelligence, demonstrating how opposing theories generate hypotheses that push research forward. Early anthropological findings, that is late 19th century, investigation showed an amazing variety of social custom but also common elements, family systems across diverse societies. Sociological theory, that is French school like Durkheim, Mauss, etc., formulated propositions suggesting that the intellectual structure of human mind is determined by the structure of society. This challenged the purely anatomical view, arguing that perceptions and thoughts are socially determined and vary qualitatively between society. The essential point is that the hypothesis must be logically derivable from and based upon a set of related sociological propositions. So, when we try to kind of formulate an hypothesis, it is very important to first of all have a very clear conceptual clarity, because it is from the concepts and facts that the hypothesis would be formulated. Once the hypothesis is formulated, it is very important to identify the choice of techniques of data collection, and the most important part is to ensure that these theories are connected to the body of hypothesis is connected to a body of theory. And as already said in the first part, that there is a cycle of knowledge from facts, concepts to hypothesis to refuting or accepting the hypothesis leads to the body formulation of knowledge, and again from the knowledge new concepts, new facts emerge which needs to be tested, and therefore again new hypothesis needs to be made. For this kind of gives us a very clear understanding of how hypothesis builds from the existing body of scientific knowledge. So, this gives us a clear understanding of the concepts and hypothesis, and for this we need to refer to the work of Goody, W.E. and P.K. Hatt, 1952 published. The title of the book is Method in Social Research, published by McGraw-Hill, and chapter 6 is talking about hypothesis. So, with this I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.